Good morning, and thank you for coming to another iteration of Midrash at Yom Rishon. This, I believe, is our fourth of the year. I think it's our first one that's not oriented around a Yom Tov of some kind. We did it before Rosh Hashanah. I think we had another one pre-Hanukkah. And no, there was another one in the mix somewhere. Right, we had one on Tefillah. That's right, one on davening. Okay, but this one, as I assume you are already aware, is about the current Torah readings, the Parshios that we are reading, and specifically the plagues in Egypt. This one is from, our opening shir for this morning is by Miriam Bessin. Miriam was born and raised in Toronto. After graduating from Ulpana, she spent a year pursuing Judaic studies at Midrash Tarova in Yerushalayim, returned to Toronto, completed her BA in religious studies as well as a degree in education at York University. She obtained her certificate in experiential Jewish education from Yeshiva University. She is in her 7th year, according to the bio on the website, with Bnei Akiva schools, where she teaches Tanakh as well as physical education. She is the athletic director at Ulpana, lovingly referred to as Prof by her students. I can testify to that. My daughter is in the school. And she also serves as the grade 12 mechanechet. She's a very popular educator, and her source sheets have just arrived, I am glad to say. So we're going to give, you don't have to get up, we'll distribute them. I will ask, though, that you please sign in. For those who didn't sign in, when you went to sit down, so if you could sign in between classes, it's very helpful for us. And it'll also ensure that you get notifications of future Midrash at Yom Rishon programs. So the title for Miriam's presentation is "The Plagues of Parshat Bo: 3 Strikes and They're Out." And then the second presentation following will be by Rabbi Zichron, and we'll get to that at about 10:45. Okay, so without further ado, Miriam, thank you so much for teaching for us.
Good morning, Chodesh Tov. I printed, or I sent in the source sheets, but I'm also going to be using the Chumash, which I think there are a couple on the tables. You don't need one if you have the source sheet, but I will be sharing some examples that aren't on the source sheet, so if you want to follow along in front of you, you're more than welcome to as well, and they're in Hebrew and English, the Stone Chumash in front of you. So I'd like to thank Rabbi Torczyner for asking me to speak this morning. Before I begin, I'd like to dedicate my talk to the memory of my grandfather who passed away 2 weeks ago. My mother's here, she's still in Shloshim, but my Zaidi was a great guy. I was really fortunate to know him for 31 years, and so I'd just like to dedicate my learning to his neshama. Should have an aliyah, and we should all be blessed with a good chodesh and a good year. So my talk, as Rabbi Torczyner mentioned, is on the plagues, on the makot in Parshat Bo. But it's a little bit misleading, as I'm also going to be referring to the plagues that we read about yesterday in Parshat Va'era. So, as a rule of thumb, or as a cute mnemonic device, how do we remember which makot appear in which parshiot? So typically, something I remember hearing as a child is if you take the letters in Parshat Va'era, the first 2 letters, so Va'era, it's Vav and Aleph are the first 2 letters. So the gematria of Vav is 6. And the gematria of Aleph is 1. 6 and 1 is 7. So we know that the breakdown is 7 makot in Parshat Va'era. And if you'd use the same trick on Parshat Bo, the letter Bet equals 2 in gematria, and the letter Aleph equals 1, which 2 and 1 equals 3. So that's how we know that there's 3 makot in this coming week's Parshat Bo, and 7 in the Parsha that we read yesterday in Parshat Va'era. So is this breakdown for a reason? 7 in last week's and 3 in next week's we couldn't fit them all into one. Is there a reason that we split it up this way? Is there something in common in the 3 leftover makot that we're going to read about in this week's parsha? So I have on the source sheet in front of you a quick glance at the 3 makot that we're going to read about this week, namely Arbe, Choshech, and Makat B'charot, so locusts, darkness, and the plague of the firstborn. So is there something in common that those 3 are left over to this week's parsha? So if we look in front of you at source number 1, we'll just look through them really briefly. So source number 1 is from Sefer Shemot. It's from Parsha Bo, chapter 10, Perek Yud, Psukim Yudalet and Tet Vav. And this is what the Torah tells us about it. Vayal ha'arbe al kol eretz Mitzrayim, vayanach b'chol gevul Mitzrayim, kaved ma'od lefanav, lo hayachen arbe kamahu, v'acharav lo yiaken, vayichas et ein kol haaretz, v'techshach haaretz, v'yochal et kol esav haaretz, v'et kol pri ha'etz, asher hotir habarad, v'lo notar kol yerek ba'etz, v'esek hasadek, b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. So what the Torah tells us about this plague of locusts is the locusts ascended over the entire land of Egypt. They alighted within all the borders of Egypt, very severe. Before them, there was never such a locust plague, and after it, there will never be one like it. They obscured the view of all the earth, and the earth became darkened. They ate all the vegetation of the earth, etc., etc. Now, I realized when I made this source sheet that I'd kind of given away the answer by boldening the words that I wanted to highlight, but pretend that's not bolden, and we'll just keep looking through the next two to figure out what our theme is. But if you've picked up on it already, then 5 points. So if we look at source number 2, it's from the second plague in this week's Parsha, which is darkness. So the Torah tells us, Vayat Moshe yado al hashamayim. Moshe, puts his hand onto the sky, stretches his hand towards the sky. Vayihi choshech afela b'chol eretz Mitzrayim shlosha yamim. And there was this thick darkness in the land of Egypt for 3 days. Lo ra'u ish et achiv lo kamu ish mitachtav shlosha yamim. Each man didn't see his brother, and they didn't stand up from their spot for 3 days. Uchol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'mashvatam. But for all the Jews, for all of the Israelites, there was light in their dwellings. And then the last plague in this week's Parsha, Makat Bechorot, which is in source number 3, at the bottom of the first page, Vayihi b'chatzi halayla v'Hashem hika kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim yibchor paro hayoshev al kiso ad b'chor hashvi asher b'veit habor v'chol b'chor behema. It came to pass at midnight that the Lord smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who's in the dungeon, and every firstborn animal. So from these first 3 sources of the final 3 plagues in Parshat Bo, the one thing they have in common is they all took place in the dark. Is that the Arba came with such, the winds and the clouds were so strong when the locusts descended that it was dark in Mitzrayim. Choshech is self-explanatory. It means dark, so it was dark. And then the plague of the firstborn happened at midnight. Now, unless you're living in Alaska, where I assume at some parts of the year midnight is actually bright, but assuming that you're not living in Alaska, then everywhere else at midnight is dark. So all 3 plagues took place in the dark. Darkness played a factor in all 3 plagues. Now, I'm going to come back to this idea of darkness and specifically looking at the plague of darkness, but I want to take a 5-minute detour to just talk about some other commonalities among some other makot, which is why I said, even though my talk is focused on the makot in this week's parsha, I also want to look a little bit at the previous makot and see if there's a pattern or see if there's commonalities among those makot as well. So if you look on the next page of the source sheet, we'll just remind ourselves of all the makot, and then we can try to figure out the breakdown and see what the themes or what the commonalities of them are. So this source number 4 is taken from the Magid section of our Haggadah. Just FYI, this is also a Dvar Torah we could share on our Shabbat tables this coming week, but it's also something that you can share at your Pesach table at the Seder. So it's a 2-for-1. So this is source number 4 that's taken from the Magid section of the Haggadah. Ilu eser makot shehevi hakadosh baruch hu al hamitzrim b'mitzrayim ve'elu hein dam tzvardea kinim arav dever shchin barad arbe choshech makat bechorot. These are the 10 plagues that God brought upon the Egyptians in Egypt, and these are them enumerated: blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the killing of the firstborn. And then we get this quote from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda haya noten bahem simanim. Rabbi Yehuda gave these makot abbreviations, and these are the abbreviations: Ditzach, Adash, Ba'achav. So he groups them together. So Ditzach, Dam, Tzvardei, Akinim, Adash, Arav, Dever, Shchin, and Ba'achav, Barad, Arbe, Choshech, and Mekat Bechorot. He breaks them into groups. So did he break them into groups because it's easier for us to remember the 10 of them with this mnemonic device? I don't know. We all know those songs that we learned in kindergarten about the 10, I don't know, anyway, there's songs and there's different things that can help us remember the 10 plagues. So we have the song. Do we really need the abbreviation? So I think one of the reasons that Rabbi Yehuda gives us this abbreviation is he's trying to group these plagues together to show that there's commonalities among these groups. So I just want to show a couple of commonalities, some patterns that we find within these makot. Again, not so much that they're relevant to this week's parsha, but relevant to yesterday and this week. So I just thought it was interesting. So we look at this Sforno, and he will give us 1, 2. He's going to give us 2 patterns or 2 similarities among the plagues. So if we look down at source number 5 at this Sforno, and this is what he says: V'hinei ditzach hayu otot bishtei hayesodot hakvedim va'adash hayu otot beba'alei chayim ube'ach hayu otot ba'avir uvechol shtay mehen hatra v'shlishit naaseh ha'ot bli bilti hatra. So this is the breakdown. So what Sforno is about to do is he's going to break down the plagues into 3 groups, but he leaves Makat B'chorot out just because the killing of the firstborn, because that's a whole other plague with a whole other commonality. So he's going to group Ditzach, Adash, and Ba'ach, like the last 3 and not the last 4, which is how the Rabbi Yehuda grouped them as Ba'achav with Makat B'chorot. He leaves Makat B'chorot out of it. So this is his breakdown and what's in common. So if you look at the first 3, Dam, Svardei, Kinim, what does he say is in common between those 3, which is why Rabbi Yehuda grouped those 3 together? Those 3 are plagues that have to do with the heavy elements, Hayesodot HaKvedim, which I loosely interpreted in the bracket, in the translation, as earth and water. If you take a look at the 3 first plagues in this past week's parsha of Dam, Svardei, Kinim, blood, frogs, and lice. Again, if you want to follow along, I have it. It's on page. It's in this book on page 324. Or 5. Yeah, 326, I'm sorry. So it's on 326, just if you wanted to follow along to see where Sforno is getting this. So he's saying the first 3 plagues have to do with earth and the water. So why? So if you look on page 326 at verse 19, this is what the Torah tells us. Hashem said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, over the canals, over the reservoirs, over all gatherings of water, and they shall become blood. So in the plague of Dam, Aharon takes the staff and he hits the water. Same thing with the frogs. The frogs come out from the water and from the lice, which again, we don't have to go through all of them, but you can trust me when I tell you that this is the case. The lice comes from the earth. Aharon hits the afar, the dust of the earth, the ground, and the lice springs forth. So the first 3 plagues all have to do with water, with earth. The second grouping that the Sforno mentions in this thing, Va'adash hayu otot beba'alei chayim. Adash, arov, dever, and shchin, wild animals, pestilence, and boils, all had to do with animals. Also kind of self-explanatory, because wild animals have to do with animals. It's in the title.
Why would they want to kill the animals?
Why would they want to kill So in one plague, it wasn't killing the animals just got extra wild. Why would he want to kill the animals? I mean, I would assume, not that this is on regular, like this is on 1 foot. I'm assuming either because it's their livelihood, so if you want to punish the Egyptians and you use your animals either for trade, like merchants are using, or for food, or for whatever, it's really inflicting the Egyptians. But I see a hand at the back.
The Egyptians worship their animals, so it's a way of attacking their gods, which is even worse than attacking them. It's to show the power of Hashem.
Excellent. So that's a point I'm going to bring in later, even with the darkness. But did you? Yes. Yeah. And it's also something, by the way, just because you brought it up. I teach Sefer Yonah, the book of Jonah, in Olpana, and in Parag Gimel, in chapter 3 of Sefer Yonah, the king of Nineveh, which is the place that God sent Yonah to, asks the people to fast and asks the animals to fast. which is so strange. Why are the animals fasting? Can animals fast? Like, what's going on there? So it's a question that my students ask why are the animals, did they do something wrong?
Yeah.
So there are different answers. So one answer is the same that Dr. Warner brought up, in that they're considered their God. So if you see your God is fasting, you're going to be motivated to fast. Or there's another answer that said the animals did sin, either by carrying the people on their shoulders to go do bad things, but then why did the animals really sin? Did they actually know? They're the getaway car. But that could be one of the answers. So back to here. So that's the theme in Adash, in the grouping of the middle three, with wild animals, pestilence, and boils, all have to do with animals. And then the last three besides Makat Bechorot, which is just a plague in and of itself, is Uba'ach, which is hail, locusts, and darkness. Hayu otod ba'avir. Those three plagues have to do with the atmosphere, have to do with the avir, with the wind, or with the atmosphere, because the hail comes from a strong wind and a strong lightning and all those things accompany the hail. With locusts, same thing. We read about in the first source. And with choshech, also, it's an atmospheric change when the darkness is brought down. So that's one commonality among the groupings of the three plagues that Sforno mentions. And a second commonality among them is what he says here, Ubechol shtay mehen hatara ubashlishit naseh ha'ot bilti hatra'ah. Another commonality is every two. So again, if we look at Ditzach, so the first two of Dam and Svardea, Moshe, or God, Moshe via God, gives Paro a warning. And the third comes without any warning. So the first two, again, if we want to look back just as an example, we're still on page 326. So if you look at the blood example on page 326, there's a warning. And the warning comes in verse 14 and 15. Hashem said to Moses, Paro's heart is stubborn, he has refused to send the people. Go to Paro in the morning. Behold, he goes out to the water, and you shall stand opposite him at the river's bank. And the staff was turned into a snake, and you shall take in your hand, you shall say to him, God, Hashem, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you, saying, send out my people that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you have not heeded up until now, yada, yada, yada. So the first two plagues in every group come with a warning. Paro knows what's coming. If he doesn't change his mind, he knows. It's not a surprise to him. He knows what's coming. But the third plague comes without a warning. Same in our second group of three. If we have Adash, the first two, Arov and Dever, wild animals and pestilence. If we wanted to look through again, I promise you it's there. God sends Moshe to give Paro a warning. Paro doesn't listen, plague. But the third one in that group, there's no warning. God just does it. And then the final grouping of this week's Parsha of hail, locusts, and darkness. Again, hail and locusts, there's a warning. Darkness, there was no warning. It just happened. So that's another commonality. And so one final commonality before I do shift my focus back to this week's Parsha is who brought the plagues and how they were brought specifically. So in the first grouping of three, which again is Ditzach, we'll know it by now because we've repeated it a few times, Ditzach, Dam, Svardea, Kinim. Who brought the first three plagues? Anybody remember, or we just read them? Aharon. Aharon brought the first three plagues. Moshe was around, but it was specifically Aharon that did it. And how did Aharon do it? He did it by holding on to Moshe's staff. So again, the proof is in front of you from Dam, from page 326 if you just look down. He's holding Moshe's staff, Moshe's mateh, and he brings about the first three plagues, which is a nice Dvar Torah in and of itself. Why was it Aharon and not Moshe? About being grateful for things that saved Moshe along the way. The second grouping of the plagues, which is again Adash, which is the Arov Dever Shchin. Who brought the second grouping of plagues? Moshe, very good. Moshe brought the second grouping of plagues without a staff. So again, if you were going to look in those sources for those second grouping, which is also, you can be found in front of you probably 2 pages from where we are right now, he doesn't have it. It's just God said to him, warn Paro, and boom. Like Moshe wasn't going to hit the animal and then the animal was going to get sick. That would be a little bit much. So it just, the plague came via Moshe, but no staff. And then these last three plagues of Barad, Arba, and Choshech was Moshe also. So Aharon doesn't factor into it anymore, but back with the staff. So again, the first three plagues is Aharon using Moshe's staff. The second three groupings of plagues is Moshe with no staff. And the last three groupings of plagues is Moshe with a staff. So just interesting commonalities and patterns that I didn't really know about when I was researching for this, and something that I wanted to share with you. I'm sure there are more commonalities and more patterns within these groupings, and I'm like open if you've heard an explanation. I would love for you to share it with me after. So that's just a little detour. But back to our topic at hand. I wanted to spend some time looking specifically into the second to last makkah, which is darkness, which is choshech, for a few reasons, which we'll see in a second. So let's go back and look at choshech one more time. We have it in source 3. It was on the first page. As what the Torah described in choshech. This is what it says. So it's source number 3. It's in Perek Yud Bet, and it's psukim really kaf aleph to kaf gimel. So this is what it says. Vayat Moshe et yado al hashemayim vayihi choshech afela b'chol eretz Mitzrayim shlosha yamim lo ra'u ish et achi v'lo kamu ish mitachtav shlosha yamim ulchol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvatam. This description of the darkness, Moshe stretches his hand towards the heavens. A thick darkness envelops the land of Egypt for 3 days, to the point where you couldn't see a friend, you couldn't stand from your spot, is the shortest description of all the plagues. All 10 plagues that we read about have more than 3 psukim devoted. Really, this was 2 psukim. The first pasuk is just God speaking to Moshe. But 2 psukim. It's so short. And not only is it the shortest description of all the 10 plagues, they all get more airtime, it seems to be the tamest. There's no damage really to infrastructure like there was when the hail comes with a fiery, snowy hail, or the locusts that ate up all the crops, and how we read early that they've never seen a plague like this and they never will see a plague like this. The plague of darkness seems meek, seems tame. What's so severe about it? And further, just to make the question maybe a little bit stronger, common thought is that the 10 plagues ascended in terms of severity, to the point where blood was, okay, it's difficult, but it's not terrible, so there's blood in the water for a little bit. Okay, so drink your vitamin water, drink your Gatorade, you can go without water maybe a little bit, to obviously the 10th plague, which is Makat Bechorot, which is the most severe. That's the common thought, that they went up in terms of like how severe, how harsh the punishments were. But if that's really what we think, and that's common teachings, then darkness is the second to last plague. So it's dark for 3 days. That's so terrible. We've all lived through a blackout. I think the most, I remember it was 2003. It was like 2 days or something. It was the summer. Do you remember before I went to Israel? I think it was August, and it wasn't just Toronto. I think it went as far as like Detroit, or we've lived through blackouts. We know what it's about. So what's so terrible about darkness? So I have 4 to 5 answers that I'd like to share with you. Again, I would like to give credit to where I heard these, but because I was looking through so many sites, I don't actually remember where I got all these answers. I got some of them from the virtual Beit Midrash, the Har Etzion website, VBM Torah or something like that .org. So some of it is credit to the teachers of Yeshiva Har Etzion in the Gush, but others are from other places. So yay to everybody. So a couple of answers as to why darkness is so terrible and why it merits being the second to last punishment. So one answer that I saw was that darkness is terrifying. We're all afraid of that which we can't see, but our imaginations take over. If you remember that scene in Home Alone, such a classic, Kevin, Macaulay Culkin, what's he scared of? The basement. Every time he goes down to the basement because it's dark, and he pictures the furnace or something, like going up and down, and that noise or something. You're scared of the dark, to the point where in Mariv, in our nighttime prayer of Mariv, we insert a blessing of Hashkivenu. If we look at the Siddur in Hashkivenu at Mariv, we ask God for protection in the night, which is a tefillah we don't see in Shachari. We don't see this tefillah in the morning. Why? Because we're not scared in the morning. When we have light, it's optimistic, it's a fresh start. Everything you were scared about the night before seems silly when you wake up in the morning when you have light. But darkness is scary. That's why we have Hashkivenu at night. So darkness is scary. That's one answer. Why is darkness so terrible? Because nobody likes the dark. Wasn't there a program also as a child called Are You Afraid of the Dark? I think it was on YTV. Are you afraid of the dark? Or something about being afraid of the dark. So that's one answer. Maybe. But then again, it's 3 days of darkness. Is that so terrible? So you have 3 days to just go to sleep? I don't know why some people wouldn't want that. So what else is going on here? So to maybe further understand what this plague was, we have Rashi, which I have on your page, I believe. I do. It's in source number 6. So this is what Rashi says on the plague of darkness. So it's from Perek Yod Pasuk Kav Bet. Choshech shel ofel shelo ra'u ish et achiv otan shloshet yamim va'od shloshet yamim achirim choshech muchpal al zeh shelo kamu ish mitachtav yoshev ein yachol la'amod omed ein yachol lishev v'lama hevi aleim choshech shehayu b'Yisrael ba'oto hador posh'im shelo hayu rotzim latzeit umetu b'shloshet yamei afela kedei shelo yir'u Mitzrim b'maflatam. So what Rashi is describing for us is that this darkness was a choshech shel ofel. It was a thick, tangible darkness. It was a darkness that could be felt. It's not just that it's dark and there's no light. It's a darkness that totally envelops you, that paralyzes you. And further, it's a darkness that he says paralyzes you to the point where you couldn't move. So if you happened to have been standing when the plague hit, according to Rashi, you couldn't sit down. And if you happened to have been sitting when the plague hit, then you couldn't stand up. It's that type of a darkness. Rashi then goes on, not for our talk now, to explain why maybe God sent darkness, and he says he used it as a cover because God killed certain Israelites in the plague of darkness as well. Because those ones didn't want to leave Egypt, so in order to save them from embarrassment, so the Egyptians would see them dying. Oh, look, they're dying too. It happened in the dark. So the Egyptians don't know that God also exacted a punishment on his own people. So that's Rashi. Ramban, which you don't have in front of you because it's very similar to Rashi, he agrees with Rashi, which is kind of strange, that never happens. But Ramban agrees with Rashi in that this darkness was a thick, tangible darkness. And he also goes on to say that it was an atmospheric change, because there was a question I read in one of my things, why couldn't they just light candles? Like, if God sent darkness, then why didn't we read in the next pasuk, like, okay, so kind of like, oh, there's a blackout, so we'd all be like, oh, I can't plug in my phone. But yeah, you can. Everybody nowadays has those portable chargers or those you know what a blackout shouldn't be so paralyzing. Tell that to us at Camp George, who got stuck on Shabbaton 3 years ago. But blackouts shouldn't be paralyzing. So why couldn't they light candles? So Ramban says because it wasn't a normal just absence of light, that at 6 a.m. the light's going to come. It was an atmospheric change. Lightness couldn't exist. It blocked out, God blocked out the ability for light to exist for those 3 days. Okay, so we have a little bit more of an understanding as to why this darkness was so bad, because it was paralyzing, because it was thick, it was tangible. I have 3 more answers. I think I have time. I have 3 more answers as to why this plague was so severe. So one of is the answer that Dr. Warner shared with us before, is by God sending darkness, sun has no role to play for 3 days. And we know that in addition to worshiping animals, the Egyptians worshiped the sun. So to not have the sun for 3 days is an attack on the Egyptians. It's an attack on their God. So it's not just, oh, it's dark, this is such a severe punishment, but it's our God doesn't exist. Our God can't come and shine light onto us, similar to the Nile. When God strikes the Nile with dam, it's also the Egyptians treated the Nile as a deity, and that was considered such an affront to them. When God goes after the Nile, so too when God goes after the sun, that's a punishment to them. A second answer, or a fourth if we're counting, I don't know. A fourth answer as to why Choshech was so severe was, if you think about it again, what was this punishment? The people were stuck. They were physically stuck for 3 days. So in other words, they were prisoners in their own homes. It's mira keneged mira. It's measure for measure. These Egyptians enslaved the Jews, enslaved the Israelites, and now they're kind of getting a taste of their own medicine. They are being held in captivity, in bondage for a few days. It's a severe punishment. We gave this to you, now we're getting it back. Similar to dam, again. God goes after the Nile because Paro instructed the babies to be thrown into the Nile. And then God goes after the Nile when he sends the dam, when he sends the blood, which is mira keneged mira, measure for measure punishment. So too here, by going after the sun, by limiting or totally immobile is when you can't move. By totally immobilizing, it's early in the morning. By totally, I haven't had my coffee. By totally immobilizing the Egyptians, you're enslaving them in their homes. And then the final answer, which I wanted to bring in as to why choshech is so severe, even though it seems on paper to be not so terrible, 3 psukim, it doesn't seem like it's so bad. It should probably be plague number 1 in terms of severity. Why is choshech so bad? So an answer that I've read and has come up a lot more recently is that more and more sources are saying that this wasn't a physical darkness, it was more a spiritual or emotional darkness, i.e. a depression. And how are people seeing that? Because again, if we look at just the pshat of the reading, you couldn't see your friend. You couldn't stand up for a few days. If we look at the symptoms of a depressed person, and I know this not just from research, but I also do have, just by teaching adolescents, I've dealt with cases of girls who might be depressed or on the border of depression. We know that they can't come to school. Why is this girl not in school? She can't physically move. She can't come to school. If you look at the pshat of the plague, people couldn't get up. People were just paralyzed in their homes. It reminds us of someone who's depressed, of someone who just can't see their friend. Even if a friend is reaching out a hand and wants to help, they're just so into what's plaguing them that is really the plague that was going on. So I brought into the bottom source number 7, just a little bit about this. So this is a source, again, I'm not sure where I found it, but at least I have someone to quote. So Rabbi Avraham Aryeh Trugman says, in psychological terms, darkness represents a sense of depression that is fed by despair and purposelessness. Depression causes people to feel alone, as if no one cares about them, and in turn leads them not to care about others. This phenomenon is quite literally described in the biblical verse, no one could see their brother. An even more extreme form of depression occurs when people are completely sunk in the abyss and virtually unable to move. They are stuck in a state of physical or emotional paralysis. This phenomenon is also quite literally described in the biblical verse, nor could anyone get up from his place. And I just thought it was interesting because on January 25th, just a few days ago, we commemorated, I don't know if that's the right word, Bell Let's Talk Day. If you were following, Bell, for a few years already has partnered with the mental health organizations to donate money every time you share a text or share a tweet or I'm not so great with even though I teach teenagers, I should know more of this, but retweet or Snapchat. I don't know what all the language is, but they partnered with it because we are recognizing more and more that mental health is a serious issue that we're not discussing enough. And if we look at this, it's possible that this plague was some type of not physical darkness. Okay, you can't move for 3 days, so you'll move in 3 days' time. Who doesn't want a vacation? Who doesn't want a break from doing everything? But it's more than that. It was a spiritual darkness. It's a depression. That's not easy. That warrants being the second to last plague. We know that people with mental health issues, we don't brush it under the rug. Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. Get up, go to school. It's something severe, and we need to talk about it more, and we need to raise more awareness. Bell Let's Talk Day shouldn't be one day. I mean, we're making strides, but we should continue the conversation every day. So it's just something that I wanted to mention in the Plague of Darkness, just because I don't know why it's written second to last, but I'm hoping that from all these answers we were able to shed light, pun intended, on why perhaps it warrants being the second to last plague. So I'll leave you with those thoughts, and thank you again for having me speak this morning, and finish up.